All right, everybody, what's going on? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. I am your tour guide around the SWAC. See what else coming at you. And we're gonna wrap up this little series that I put together, looking at the FBS transfers, guys. Like in the previous video, guys who went from SWAC to FBS, and now we're gonna take a look at the guys who went from FBS to SWAC. I'm gonna link the video, I'm gonna link the SWAC to FBS video in on this video here, so the link will be in the description, and it also will be at the end at the end screen if you want to go back and check that one out. um Really, I did this because, with this being recruiting time and everything, you can see a lot of people, get excited about transfers, and some, transfers up and down happen for a reason. And sometimes you get some really good guys, and sometimes you lose some good guys, and sometimes you get guys that come and play, and then you get guys that move up that don't play. So I wanted to just kind of take a look at it. And I found in my previous video that more guys, when they move up from the SWAC, they are pretty productive. There's a good bit of guys that played last season when they moved up, and some of them had really good seasons. So that there are a lot of guys that get to see action in these situations. So I I wanted to just kind of look at it and put it together for myself and see if those narratives that we use a lot, or if they're really true, or if they're things that kind of are just kind of just false. So I really think right now that it's about what and what. So before we get into all of that, man, y'all make sure y'all hit those socials: Facebook is SWAC Talk, Instagram SWAC Talk, Twitter SWAC Talk 76. Also, don't forget to like the video, comment, and share your thoughts. I do have a previous video, was a short that I did to show my winners picks for tonight's basketball game. So if you want to check that out, you can check that out on the channel. We're gonna cover signing day, which is right around the corner. So we're gonna cover that. I'm not sure if I'm gonna go live that night, or if we're just gonna kind of do a show either Thursday or Friday, or whatever. But we'll flesh that out, and you can always find that information out on my socials. We do have Swag Smoke coming at you Thursday. Not quite sure what I'm gonna drop on Wednesday, but I'm gonna probably drop something on Wednesday. Saturday, I have a short to show my picks for Saturday's games, and then Sunday I'll recap those games, and then Monday I have a short to give you my winners for next Monday's game. So that's pretty much how we're gonna go for the time being. Of course, as different things come out, we'll work those in. So make sure you hit the notification bell to be alerted to when videos drop on different days that are not like my Wednesday and Sunday typical days. So make sure you keep it there, and that way you know what's what when it drops. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We're gonna start at the top. 122 guys transferred into the SWAC from FBS. That's quite. Obviously, that's quite a lot. We had 42 guys move up from the SWAC to FBS, so that's a huge difference right there. 94 guys saw action this season. That's about 77% of the guys who transferred down, which is a really good number. I mean, I would have probably put it at 50%, but at 77% of guys actually saw action is a really good number. So that means that the majority of the time you're gonna have guys that play, and how well they do. That all depends on fit, depth chart, scheme, how good they are, how receptive they are to things, buy-in. There's a lot of different factors that go into a guy being able to play, but a lot of these guys have seen action. So just looking at it from a number standpoint, FAMU brought in 31 FBS transfers this season, and they had a coaching change. They lost, they lost a lot of guys, so they tried to go with the FBS route to fill that in, and to varying results. Bethune-Cookman also had a lot of transfers. They brought in 16. Grambling brought in 17. The fewest was Valley. They brought in 4, Everybody else was kind of in that 5-6 range. So we're gonna start at the top, and we'll work our way through the conference. So Alabama A&M, they brought in 8 FBS transfers this season, and they had 5 guys see action. Evan Graham, a linebacker from Georgia State, he did not play, as far as I can tell. Also, I'm gonna throw this caveat out there. If a guy, if he saw special team snaps or something, they don't always have the participation record. So going through 12 games for every team to see if number 32 played. I'm not going to do that all the time. Some teams do list that. So, some of these guys may have saw some special teams action. Some of these guys that I say did not play, they may have saw special teams action, but for the intent of this, they're just going to be listed as did not play because I could not find that information right now. So Evan Graham from Georgia State, he was a linebacker. He did not play. P.J. Simmons, also a linebacker from Georgia State, did not play. Elias Cloy, offensive lineman from Georgia Tech. He played in 10 games this season. Olan Robinson, a linebacker from Liberty. He saw 11 games of action, had 9 tackles and a half a tackle for loss. Avion Smith, quarterback from Miami of Ohio. He played in 7 games this season. He had 15 carries for 104 yards and 1 touchdown. He also went 22 of 32, passing for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. A.J. Toney, wide receiver from Middle Tennessee State, did not play. Tyrell Lawrence, offensive lineman, Minnesota. He played in 11 games this season. And Logan McGregor, long snapper from New Mexico State, he played in 12 games this season. So as you can see, the majority of the guys that they had played. Smith got some action early at quarterback. Of course, 2 offensive linemen played a lot this season, and the long snapper was most likely your starter. That's a pretty solid group of guys that they brought in. They didn't bring in a lot, but the guys they brought in, they did contribute. Looking at Alabama State, they brought in 6 guys, and they had 5 guys see action. So almost everybody that Bama State brought in had some action. Brennan Caesar, defensive back from Air Force, he played in 8 games, had 5 tackles. Caleb Offord, also a defensive back from Buffalo, he played in 12 games, had 29 tackles, a half a tackle for loss, and an interception. Jabari Kirkendall, a running back from Coastal Carolina, he had 6 games of action, had 3 catches for 46 yards, no carries. Desheen Jackson, defensive back from Troy, he played in 10 games. He had 29 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sack and 1 interception. And Jeremiah Frazier, offensive lineman, also from Troy, he played in 11 games this season. Luke Harkless, wide receiver from Troy, did not see any action as far as I can tell. Pine Bluff, 4 guys transferred down from FBS. They had 3 guys, Alcorn, 4 guys transferred down. They had 3 guys see action. Caleb Anderson, wide receiver from Akron, played in 9 games, had 7 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown. Jerron Griffin, linebacker from Akron, he played in 3 games, had 3 tackles. Dorian Lewis, running back, did not play. Markel McLaurin, defensive back from Southern Miss, he played in 11 games, had 41 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries. So as you can see, Alcorn, again, didn't bring in a lot of guys, but the guys they brought in played. McLaurin was a key contributor to them on defense. Anderson got some decent snaps and was able to score one touchdown this season. But all in all, pretty mixed bag there. Pine Bluff brought in 5 guys. They had 4 that played. Lorenzo Bowers, wide receiver from Charlotte, did not play. Donovan Giles, wide receiver from Florida Atlantic, he played in 12 games, had 8 catches, 123 yards, and 1 touchdown. Zamarion Weber, running back from ULM, 11 games of action, 65 carries, 334 yards, 1 touchdown. He had 1 catch for -1 yard. Marquise Allen Patman, defensive back from Nevada, he played in 11 games, had 38 tackles and 1 fumble recovery. And Amani Roan, wide receiver from Ohio, he played in 11 games and 19 catches, 294 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So as you can see, Pine Bluff went offense for the most part on the FBS guys, and 3 of those guys that they brought in saw a lot of action. Weber got a lot of burn at running back. They were really thin there, so he was able to see a lot of action there. The receivers were kind of up and down. Rome was a solid contributor. Obviously, when you have one guy who catches a ton of passes, like Giovanni Gibson, the numbers are going to be skewed that way. But Rome was a guy who was solid early, especially. Giles, saw some action, had 8 catches. So, pretty decent group of guys there. The one defensive guy they had, was a really solid defensive back for them. Even though their defense wasn't great, but they were able to bring in some guys who actually contributed to this team. So didn't go crazy with numbers, but the production was actually pretty solid for a team that kind of had a rough season, but they were able to get some guys who actually came in and played. Speaking of guys that came in and played, Bethune-Cookman brought in 16 guys out the portal, and 15 of them played. So they did a really good job of bringing in guys that they identified that could help them on the field. Now they have varying levels of production, but to have pretty much everybody you bring in and see some kind of action is a big thing, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. Again, defense wasn't great, but they brought in some guys who really contributed on that side of the ball. Oren Patu, defensive lineman from Arizona, he played in 11 games. He had 30 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and a fumble recovery. Sean Russ, defensive back from Arizona State, 7 games, 15 tackles. Raymond Woody III, defensive back from Cal, he played in 11 games, had 87 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 interception. Michael Bowens, quarterback from Charlotte, he played in 4 games, had 9 carries for 20 yards, went 3 of 11 for 1 yard, no touchdowns and an interception. Dario Melendez, defensive lineman from Coastal Carolina, he played in 5 games, had 4 tackles. Tremaine Mayha Pasteur, linebacker from Colorado State, he played in 6 games, had 18 tackles. Dimitri Hester, wide receiver from Florida Atlantic, did not play. Terrence Alexander, defensive back, Jacksonville State, he played in 11 games, had 17 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 sack. Andrew Volmar, defensive back from ULM, played in 12 games, had 30 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 2 interceptions. Antoine Watts, defensive back from ULM, 12 games, 70 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 2 interceptions, and 1 forced fumble. Marcus Velez, tight end from Marshall, he played in 11 games, had 19 catches, 152 yards, no touchdowns. Cross Patton, running back, Nevada, 8 games of action, 9 carries for 17 yards. Lorenzo Jenkins from Pitt, wide receiver, 12 games, 23 catches, 285 yards, 3 touchdowns. Dallas Corbett, defensive lineman from UCF, he played in 12 games, had 36 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Courtney Reese, running back from UNLV, he played in 12 games, had 67 carries, 231 yards, 1 touchdown, caught 13 passes for 103 yards and 1 touchdown. And Joe Steen Clark, receiver from UTEP, played in 11 games, caught 6 passes for 50 yards and a touchdown. Again, you had guys like Raymond Woody, who was the leading tackler on this team. You had guys like Volmar and Watts and Patu, who were really solid on their defense. You had a guy like Lorenzo Jenkins, who was one of the leading receivers on the team. Velez played solidly late in the season at tight end. Courtney Reese was a guy who early saw some heavy action before Dennis Palmer kind of took over that role. But again, they had a lot of guys who actually saw a lot of action. There was a lot of playing time to be had. If this was a video game, the playing time deal breaker would have been, A+, because there was tons of playing time on both sides of the ball, for on both sides of the ball, but they really, really went heavy on defense, and those defensive guys all pretty much saw action. Offensively, it was a different mix, but the guys who produced for them offensively were some of the key guys on their offense. So they had a pretty solid rate of guys who not only played but were productive. And when you bring in a lot of guys and you have a lot of guys play, I think that says a lot of different things about your team. But they did do a good job of identifying guys who could hit the field for them and make some plays. Next up is Florida A&M. Like I said, they had 31 guys transfer in. They had 23 guys that played. Again, a mixed bag. The guys who really played were some of their top guys. Jay Nevins, defensive lineman from Central Michigan. He played in 4 games, had 3 tackles. Daniel Richardson, a quarterback from Florida Atlantic. He had 12 games of action, 48 carries, minus 16 yards. He was 231 or 330 for 2,662 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. SWAC newcomer of the year. Ace Cobb, wide receiver. FAU, he played in 9 games, had 12 catches, 250 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Latree Kinsler, FIU, he played in 2 games. He had 1 tackle. He was a linebacker. Damari Tate, defensive back from Florida State, did not play. Max Larson, kicker from Florida State, did not play. Goldie Lawrence, wide receiver, Florida State, he played in 11 games, had 251 yards and 1 touchdown. Had 9 kickoff returns for 134 yards on the season. He also had 2 rushes for 48 yards, so he was an all-purpose type of guy, especially later in the season. Brooks Hickman, wide receiver, Georgia State, did not play. Devon Westmoreland, defensive lineman from Kansas. He played in 12 games, had 33 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Avery Huff, defensive back from Louisiana Tech, did not play. Thad Franklin, running back, Louisiana Monroe. 12 games of action, 120 carries, 653 yards, 5 touchdowns. Also caught 19 passes, 162 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Simeon Hines from ULM, defensive back, 4 games of action, 8 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Bryson Martin, quarterback from Miami, he had 1 game of action, was 1 for 1 for 6 yards. Jerome Nichols, linebacker from Michigan, he played in 7 games, had 14 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. Jalen Ward, Middle Tennessee State, wide receiver, 10 games of action, 13 catches, 172 yards, and 1 touchdown. Corey Collier, defensive back, Nebraska, did not play. Marquez Bell, receiver, Old Dominion, 10 games of action, 16 catches, 148 yards. Keyshawn Wicks, running back, Old Dominion, 1 game, 5 carries, 10 yards. Carter Johnson, tight end from Pitt, 12 games. He had 5 catches for 12 games, 15 catches, 137 yards, 1 touchdown. Antonio Camon, defensive lineman from Pitt, 2 games, 1 tackle. Brandon Callaway, defensive back from Purdue, played in 3 games, had 5 tackles. Braylon Oliver, defensive back, Syracuse, played in 5 games, had 18 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. Elijah Philippe, offensive lineman from Troy, he played in 6 games. Jalen Rogers, wide receiver from Tulane, he played in 1 game, had 3 catches for 28 yards. Amari Johnson, wide receiver, UCF, did not play. Nick Demetrius, defensive lineman, UNLV, played in 6 games, had 4 tackles, half tackle for loss. Jamil Sanders, defensive back, USF, 12 games of action, 41 tackles, 5.5 tackle for loss, 1 sack, 1 fumble recovery. Brian Norris, linebacker for USF, did not play. And Stan Tobias Smith, defensive lineman from USF, he played in 2 games, had 4 tackles. So, your starting quarterback was in this mix. A couple of his targets was in this mix. A couple guys on defense who were solid were in this mix. One of your top running backs was in this mix. So you did have some very productive guys that came in. You brought in a lot of guys. You played quite a few of them. Some of those guys were more depth type guys, but this team was going through a turnover. So bringing in a lot of guys, they threw a lot of it that way. And it went that way for them. I missed a couple of names. Devon Walker from Vanderbilt, wide receiver, did not play, and Nathan Gates, offensive lineman from Washington State, played in 3 games. So you had some guys who played a little bit. Then you had some guys who were extremely productive. So all in all, a mix. And they went both sides of the ball for transfers because they were really trying to fill holes. So they did pretty decently with what they brought in. Especially for the number of guys they brought in. Grambling brought in 17 guys, played 12. Reed Harradine was the starting kicker. He was 13 or 19. He came from Alabama. He was 13 or 19 on field goals, 33 or 35 on extra points. Patrick Williams, the second from Arizona State, did not play. Mon Bethea from offensive lineman from Bowling Green did not play. Isaac Washington, defensive lineman, Charlotte, played in 12 games, had 28 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 1 fumble recovery. Jordan Johnson, running back from Hawaii, did not play. Ashton Fry, quarterback from Jacksonville State, played in 3 games, 7 carries, minus 21 yards, 4 of 7, passing for 9 yards. Jacoby Bellazar, wide receiver, Mississippi State, played in 11 games, caught 15 passes, 155 yards, 1 touchdown. Deuce Jones, wide receiver, New Mexico, did not play. Dale J. Bailey, quarterback, Ole Miss, played in 7 games, had a couple starts, 36 carries, 42 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was 39 of 72 passing, 440 yards. No touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Blake Davis, defensive back, San Jose State, 12 games, 31 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery, and 1 block kick. Johnny Stefano from SMU, starting punter, 67 points, 2,729 yards, 40.7 yard average. Aknan Shabazz, linebacker from South Carolina, did not play. Kobe Williams, offensive lineman from Troy, played in 12 games. James Eaglin, defensive lineman from Tulsa, he played in 5 games at 1 tackle. Bryce Cage, defensive lineman from Utah State, played in 12 games, had 49 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble. And Jalen Rudolph from UTEP, he had 10 games of action, 19 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. And Jonathan Horton from Virginia, defensive lineman, 8 games, 25 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, and a fumble recovery. Again, they, that mainly the defensive guys that they brought in saw a lot of action. They did have 2 specialists that were their starting guys that transferred in. The guy who basically played a lot at quarterback late in the season also transferred in, and you had a receiver who saw some solid action. So they a lot of the guys they brought in did see some significant action and did have some significant numbers. So they were really really strong there. And I did not see on this list Hargrove or Bradford at running back. I know both of those guys. I know they were both transferred, but for whatever reason, they weren't on this list. So those were their 2 starting running backs basically. So I'm gonna include them here. They both were very productive guys. I think both over 400 yards rushing on the season, and they both saw a lot of snaps at running back. Let me see if I can I'm just gonna pull their numbers up just to do them some justice. And they, like I said, for whatever reason they weren't on this list, so that would put Grambling at 19 guys transferring in with 14 guys actually playing. And that's again that's an even more solid ratio of guys. Bradford, he had 105 carries on the season, 403 yards, average 3.8 yards per carry with 5 touchdowns. And Hargrove had 95 carries for 432 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns. Neither one of them really. Hargrove had 14 catches for 99 yards, and Bradford had 13 catches for 74 yards. So those were 2 guys who were extremely valuable to that run game. I don't know why they weren't on this list, but I decided to put them on right now. If they aren't considered transfers for whatever reason, then strike it. But we're gonna go with it. Jackson State had 13 guys come in, 10 of them played. Clyde Price, the third running back from Akron, did not play. David Jones Jr., linebacker from Cincinnati, he played in 10 games, had 10 tackles and a half a tackle for loss. Cameron McCoy, quarterback, Eastern Michigan, he played in 8 games, had 24 carries, 163 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was 18 of 38 passing, 310 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Bryson Moss, Eastern Michigan, running back, he played in 6 games, had 3 carries, 10 yards. Marvin Landy, tight end, Florida Atlantic, played in 13 games, had 17 catches, 235 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Anthony Cunningham, defensive lineman, Iowa State, did not play. Jamil Gardner, Kent State, 8 games of action, 12 catches, 145 yards, 1 touchdown. Isaiah Villanueva, offensive lineman, North Texas, played in 1 game. Kenneth Giles, San Diego State, 6 games of action, 1 tackle. Tyquan Henderson, Southern Miss, wide receiver, played in 7 games, had 14 catches, 238 yards, 1 touchdown. Micah Cherry, defensive back from Toledo, 8 games of action, 6 tackles, one block kick. Joshua Nobles, Western Michigan defensive lineman, 14 games of action, 57 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, 3.5 forced fumbles. Pretty solid group of guys here. McCoy was a guy who was right there in the mix at quarterback early in the season before he kind of got banged up. Those receivers, Gardner and Henderson, came on strong later in the season. Landy was a guy who made some big plays at tight end. And, of course, Joshua Nobles was a force on that defense. So you had like a mix of guys, but the guys they brought in and they played really well and definitely contributed to that team that won the SWAC. So they definitely had a good hit rate on their guys. And, they did exactly what they needed to do to plug those holes that they had. Valley had 3 guys transfer in, 2 of them played. Both of them came from Louisiana Tech. Kobe Bird, defensive back from Louisiana Tech. He played in 12 games, had 24 tackles. And Zion Reeves, defensive lineman from Louisiana Tech. He played 11 games, had 13 tackles. And Malik Curtis, defensive back from Miami, he did not play. So they went defense for that 3 transfers, and 2 of them saw some solid action. And so, they didn't go as deep with the FBS guys as I thought they might have, with a team needing to fill a ton of holes. But I thought they did a solid job with getting a couple guys who actually contributed to the defense. Prairie View had 7 guys come in, 5 of them played. Fred Stokes from Central Michigan, he played in 12 games at 31 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, 2 forced fumbles. Lucas Coley, quarterback from Houston, he played in 2 games. He had 6 carries, minus 17 yards, 8 of 20 passing, 108 yards. Corey Swinney, defensive back from North Texas, played in 3 games, had 1 tackle. Dante Hunter, the second from Ohio, he played in 7 games, had 5 tackles, a half a tackle for loss. Carvin Watson from TCU, wide receiver, did not play. James Burns, wide receiver, UConn, played in 9 games, had 2 carries for 78 yards and a touchdown. Had 32 catches for 505 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Mekhi Mercer, defensive back from UNLV, did not play. Stokes was a guy who was a key contributor on that defense. Coley was a guy who they anticipated being the guy quarterback. Got banged up in the early portion of the season. And Burns was a guy who came on extremely strong down the stretch. Had a couple big games. Had some big long touchdowns. So he was a guy who definitely was a factor in their offense and a big time playmaker when he got back on the field. So out of the 5 guys that played, 2 of them put up really good numbers. One guy was anticipated to, but he did not pan out this season. And so that was a pretty solid group there. Southern brought in 5 guys. They played all 5 guys. Herman Bristol III from Air Force, defensive back. He played in 12 games, had 62 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries. Eric Reed, defensive back from Georgia Tech, played in 9 games, had 9 tackles and 2 sacks. Carmelo Crump, offensive lineman, ULM, he played in 1 game. The Travion Brown, wide receiver from North Texas, had 8 games of action, caught 10 passes, 171 yards and a touchdown. And Xavier Spencer, defensive back from UTSA, played in 11 games, 28 tackles, a half a tackle for loss. Obviously, they went defense more. 3 out of 5 were defensive guys. Brister started pretty much all season. Reed got some starts, and Spencer got some starts late in the season. Those 2 guys kind of platooned at their defensive back at the cornerback spot later in the season. Brown, he had some big plays here and there for the offense, and so 4 of those guys were definitely key contributors to this team, and so they had a pretty solid rate there, bringing in 5 guys and playing all 5 guys. And finally, Texas Southern brought in 7 guys. They had 5 guys play. Zarion Courtney, wide receiver from Alabama, did not play. Zion Clayville, wide receiver, Louisiana Tech, played in 7 games, caught 2 catches, had 13 yards. And Jaden Williams, defensive back from Miami, Ohio, he played in 10 games, had 29 tackles, 1.5 tackle for loss, 2 interceptions, and 1 fumble recovery. And Quintrell Quinn, running back from Ohio, he played in 10 games, 113 carries, 651 yards, 6 touchdowns. Stephon Wright, defensive lineman, SMU, played in 10 games at 17 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Charles Schelling, running back, Texas A&M, did not play. And Keelan Cox, defensive back, Wyoming, he played in 37. He played 11 games, 37 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 1 interception, and 2 forced fumbles. Again, the guys that played, some of those guys were key to that team. Quinn was a big time factor in that run game. Williams was a solid guy on defense. Wright was another key cog in the defensive line, and Cox was another guy who made a lot of big plays for them this season. So, all in all, a lot of guys were very productive who transferred down. Of course, you had your guys who did not play, and you had your guys who were depth guys, but the guys who saw extensive action were really good guys. And so I think, again, it's always a case-by-case basis. The guys that come in, you don't pencil them automatically in as starters unless they were like all conference guys or key guys where they came from. But the average guy coming in with no snaps, you don't pencil them in as starters. But a lot of those guys obviously have the talent to play. And when they do get the opportunity, they tend to produce. Although there are those guys that, come in and don't necessarily buy into being in the SWAC. They come in thinking that, they're going to walk on the field and, see all the action that they want. And it doesn't work out that way. But I think all in all, solid group of guys. And again, my narrative was kind of shaking a little bit where you see that guys transfer, they play. Again, you're not gonna have 100%, but 75% of guys that came in played. I think that's a strong number, and so I expect to see that number moving forward to be similar. So that's gonna do it for this show. I thank y'all for tuning in. We'll be back on Wednesday with something, I don't know what yet, but we'll be back on Wednesday, and then Thursday is SWAC Smoke, live 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. Saturday, drop a short to give my winners for Saturday's game. Sunday, recap those games. And then, from now, we get into signing day and whatever else. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC. See you well signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.